The first topic that we have to discuss is understanding notes on written music, understanding the musical staff, clefs, and notes on the staff, and also how these relate to piano roll. One of the greatest strengths that you can have as a producer or recording engineer is to be able to speak the language of the musician, band, or artist that you're working with. This will cut down so many barriers and help you avoid so much confusion in the studio so that you can get your job done better and more efficiently. So let's get right into this. Traditionally, notes or musical pitches are shown on a staff or staves for plural. So this is one staff, this is two staves, this is three staves. Each staff represents an individual instrument within the larger musical work. So think of these kind of like tracks or track headers within your DAW. Each software instrument or MIDI instrument in your project represents a different unit of the overall song, and each staff can represent an instrument in a full orchestra. So in traditional written music, you might have a full score which shows multiple staves all at once, so that the conductor, the musical director, or the recording engineer can follow along. Or these might be broken up into individual parts for the individual musicians. Now, it's pretty uncommon for pop, rock, or other modern musicians to bring scores of written music into the studio. Just keep in mind that the goal here is not for you to be able to sight read music notation. The goal is for you to be able to speak the musician's language. So keep that in the back of your head anytime I cut to a music notation example. Most instruments like guitar, bass, violin, clarinet, trumpet, really pretty much any wind or string instrument is going to read music off of a single staff. Other instruments that have a more extended range, like piano, will actually read off of two different staves, but I'll talk about this in the next video. The staff has lines and spaces that represent individual notes or musical pitches. Just for future reference, if I use the words note or pitch, I'm using these synonymously. The staff can represent higher notes toward the top and lower notes toward the bottom, and these notes can actually extend beyond the outer limits of the staff by creating additional lines and spaces to place notes higher or lower. These are called ledger lines, and I'll talk more about these in just a bit. Typically, one of two clefs can be placed on the staff: the treble clef, which looks like this, and the bass clef, which looks like this. Clefs are used as a pitch reference on the staff. So, for example, the note A on treble clef is actually the note C in bass clef. I'll explain this in just a bit, but one thing to keep in mind is that there are other clefs out there. There's tenor clef, alto clef, percussion clef for drum instruments, but typically treble and bass clef are the most common. Typically, instruments that play in a higher range will use the treble clef, so guitar, violin, trumpet, these are all instruments that read music from the treble clef. Lower instruments like bass guitar, cello, upright bass, and tuba will read from bass clef. The way you can read notes from the staff is actually quite easy. The treble clef is often called the G clef because the treble clef symbol circles around the G line on the staff. So in treble clef, this note is G. Now, musical pitches range alphabetically from A to G, then they repeat themselves. So the next space up from G is A, then the next line up is B, then C, D, E, F, and then G again. And you can continue this pattern further up and further down the staff. Earlier, I mentioned ledger lines. The ledger lines allow you to extend the range of the staff beyond its normal limit, and most instruments can play lower and higher above the staff. So these ledger lines are actually quite important for written music. With bass clef, this is often called F clef because the two dots of the bass clef identify the note F. So this note is F, then G, A, B, then on ledger lines, C, D, E, and F again. Going down, you have E, D, C, B, A, G, and finally at the very bottom, a low F. Again, ledger lines can be used here to extend the low range of the staff. Certain instruments like tuba, for example, can play really low notes and often play notes that are several ledger lines below the staff. So that's how you can read notes on the treble and bass clef staves. In the next video, I'll show you how these relate to notes on the piano, and also how they relate to piano roll editors.